Welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Evans. I'm the labor cohort manager here at the Solutions Journalism Network. We're hosting this webinar today with Jennifer Brandel from Hearken. Largely out of our work in the labor cohort, we've seen a lot of success bringing in Jennifer to work with our newsrooms in this initiative, specifically around community engagement, and wanted to take the time today to share that out with the rest of our network. So as I mentioned, for those of you who were on already, this is being recorded and it will be posted to our website. And so feel free to be off camera if you would like. We will have time for questions at the very end, but if anything comes up during the webinar, you can feel free to drop that in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as Jennifer is presenting. And with that, I'll introduce Jennifer Brandel from Hearken. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us today. As she gets set up, I'm going to launch a poll because we would love to hear where y'all work, what kind of work you do. So if you can just take a minute or two to answer this, we'll get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. All right, the poll should have shown up for each of you, so please answer that when you have a sec. And I'm just going to bring up my screen here to share. Let's see. All right. Should we get the right one? Yep. Okay. All right, Angela, can you see? Let's see, my full screen here.
Yes, it's not in share mode yet, though.
Oh, great. Cool. I used the wrong one. Sorry, folks. Rookie mistake here. I will open this up, but that'll give you just another moment to answer this poll. And Angela, are you going to be the closer of the poll?
I will. Yep. Let me know. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. It looks like we have mostly reporters and editors, newsroom leaders, and freelancers here, a couple nonprofit, a couple educators, just so we know. All right.
Okay. And now can you see my full screen?
Hey, it's still
fun. Okay. Let me just, I'm going to a different screen now. Sorry, folks. I have too many screens going on, and this happened to me the other day. All right.
I just shared the results just so y'all know who's all here.
Okay. All right. I swear this isn't my first rodeo, but you wouldn't know it. Okay.
You're fine.
There we go. Okay. All right. Now are we good?
We are good.
Okay, perfect. Figured it out. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I see some real veterans of engagement work on here, so I hope this isn't too much 101 and a little bit more that has something to offer you. If you are someone who's new to engagement, I really want to share with you some of the fundamentals on engagement, as well as some great examples of how to combine engagement journalism and solutions journalism, because like it has been said before, they go together like peanut butter and jelly or peanut butter and chocolate, depending on which is your preferred combination, but they really do complement one another. And we're excited to see more and more journalists and newsrooms starting to use them as part of a greater whole of changing how they do their coverage. So I just wanted to take a second and say why we exist. The company I started is called Hearken, which means to listen and to give respectful attention. And we exist because many newsrooms and journalists really need help with understanding who they're trying to reach, their information needs, with creating more trusting relationships, with sustaining their business operation through direct support from the public and not just advertising, and scaling up projects that have to do with engagement into ongoing practices. So not having engagement be something special that one person does or you do every so often, but having it be part of a pattern of what you offer so that people always know you're there to listen to them. So that's a little bit about what Hearken does. But I want to start off now just really zooming out to the big picture paradigm shift that's happening right now in journalism and frankly in other industries as well, which is to stop assuming you know what the people you're trying to serve need and start by listening and asking them. So this is a gross generalization, but hopefully it's useful for you as you situate yourself in what is happening in the broader context of journalism at this moment. So journalism was initially designed and created in a very different era, as we all know, pre-digital era, and it was optimized for speed, efficiency, and distribution. So this was back in the day when you were competing with a limited number of people for attention for content that could be called news. And really with this approach, it made sense for newsrooms to start to focus on this idea of like feeding the beasts and filling containers, because they had a lock on where people could go to get their info, and they wanted to be quicker than their competition, get to more people than their competition, and really be as efficient as possible. And so with that kind of operating system, it makes sense that the public gets shut out of the story process because it's seen as being less efficient and less speedy. And the public ends up being treated as a consumer from which to extract value. Now, these sorts of models and ideas are still very, very evident and alive and well in many newsrooms that have been around for a while. So some are still kind of stuck in this pre-information age kind of operating system. But the emerging model that we're seeing so many newsrooms and startup newsrooms use is to be optimized for listening, relevance, and trust. Because after all, if you are in an information environment in which you are competing against Netflix and Candy Crush and TikTok and every sort of thing in order to get people's attention, you need to be as relevant as possible to them. And in order to be relevant, you actually have to know what it is they're looking for. And to really know, you have to be in relationship. You have to ask them. You can't just study, the tea leaves from your analytics and be like, people liked this, so you should do more. It's really about being in relationship with them ahead of time to create things that are the most use. So with this approach in optimizing for these values, the public has to be engaged in the story process. They have to be part of what you're doing. And they instead are treated as a partner to create value for rather than to extract value from. Okay, now if you're someone who's paying attention to the journalism world, you've probably come across a real mover and shaker named Daryl Holiday, who is one of the co-founders of City Bureau. And he and a bunch of other folks recently published this great roadmap for local news. And in a tweet storm that he did about it, he put up a from to chart. And this is close to my heart because it was based on a from to chart me and some other folks have made for a whole different thing. But it really helps to explain kind of some of these characteristics of the organizational culture, who's benefiting, who's owning, et cetera, of the dominant system or the traditional system and the emergent one. And I wanted to point out here with these two arrows that solutions and participation are part of the new system. So again, you'll see later on as I give some examples, but these two approaches and ways of doing work are really not only complementary, but they are part of this bigger system that is starting to emerge. One other thing I just wanted to say about labor and about this moment and big picture wise is I think we all know, if you're here, you hopefully know it, that journalism is absolutely vital to having a functioning society and a functioning democracy. And when I think about engagement and I think about democracy, there's a disconnect here because we are expected to sustain a national pattern of democracy in the US where we, have representation, a voice in decision making, there's collaboration. But yet a lot of our institutions that support democracy, such as newsrooms, aren't very democratic themselves. They aren't necessarily having great representation of the people they're trying to serve. The people they serve don't have a voice in decision making. Now, of course, journalists and editors aren't elected officials, but thinking about how do you have coherence in a whole democracy, I think that there's a lot of energy and a lot of innovation that can happen from thinking how we democratize the very structures we're part of and the products that we're making from those structures. So some examples here are like participatory budgeting, worker-owned and managed co-ops, which is a real big deal in the labor movement right now, participatory city planning, this public powered journalism, these sorts of things are all democratizing processes. So, okay, now that I've given you some like high level, big picture stuff, I want to get into some engagement fundamentals. And again, feel free to throw questions in the chat whenever you have them. And Angela, I will rely on you to jump in and unmute if there's something specific to the moment I should answer. If not, we'll take the questions at the end. Okie doke. So engagement, what does it mean? It is a word that can mean everything and nothing depending on where you come from. It might feel like a buzzword, might feel extremely vague, might be used to describe 10 different things that are somehow different, but you can't put your finger on it. So at Hearken, we offer an engagement definition. If you'd like to borrow it, we welcome that. But essentially, we think of engagement and that word like you would outside of journalism, in which if you ask someone or tell someone you're engaged, what do they think? They think you're in a mutually responsive relationship with someone, and you may get married, and that you are dedicating yourselves to one another's well-being and happiness, and that you're electing to be tight and for the long term. And so we think about engagement in that same way, that it really happens when people are responsive to one another and they are able to have feedback loops and create something mutually beneficial. So with that, we've created the engagement ring, pun very much intended, which is essentially a feedback loop. There's lots of different ways of doing feedback loops. Some have 3 steps, some have 5, some have 27. Doesn't matter. It is about a process by which there is that mutually beneficial exchange. So in the one that we offer, which again is kind of like a blunt instrument that you can use and fill in the blanks for the kind of input you'd like to get, starting on the upper left, there has to be a call and a response. So the news organization can invite input from the public. This could be in the form of questions, comments, memories, pictures, opinions, axes to grind, whatever you want. You're inviting something from the public to listen to. The second step is hopefully the people you're trying to serve provide that input. They give you something that you're asking for. Now, the big thing that a lot of newsrooms fall down on is actually listening to that and doing something with it. They might count and say, wow, we got so many comments on this call out or so much engagement. But if it doesn't actually make a difference in your decision making and it doesn't influence what you're creating, then it's really what we call being an asshole. So if you just stop there and you don't actually take that into account, I collaborated with a colleague, Andrew Haig from Ground Source. If you want to dig more into the asshole terminology, we define it much more. So it's really about how do you not just count that input, but actually listen to it, use it, process it, and have it matter in whatever products you're making, whether that's a newsletter, a broadcast, digital input, event, whatever that is, to actually take what you've heard and learn from it. And very importantly, to acknowledge the people who contributed to it and to follow up with them to let them know you actually heard them. One thing I worry about when people start to do engagement and they haven't really planned on the different steps for it is that you can actually erode trust if you don't follow up with people and they just feel like you're asking and they have no idea if what they're giving you is mattering. And they might start to feel like you're extracting a benefit from them rather than providing something for them with that input. So we will get into extractive relationships shortly, but this is kind of the general idea. Oops, how did I do that? Cool. All right, are we still, oh, I clicked on it accidentally. All right, we're still seeing my screen, right, Angela? Good?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. All sorts of, is Mercury in retrograde? I don't know what's going on with me and my tech. The next step is just making sure you close that feedback loop. So you really to listen to the input is one thing and to make content from it is one thing, but it's really when you acknowledge and let people know what happened to it that you've closed the loop. And so I want to just say top line, the more that your audience or community is invited, included, engaged, and heard, the more insight and ideas and relationships you're going to generate, and the more likely that the reporting you do is going to be original and differentiated from the competition, that it will break news or yield new insights, that it will be relevant, and it will be effective. Because you're basically market testing your ideas before you invest the time and money to report them. So another way you can look at this, I love graphics to explain some of these concepts, is really flipping from this model of a newsroom kind of acting as a parent, saying, here's what we think you need to know, public, and kind of being at a remove from the people they're serving, and where the audience kind of looks abstracted, whether that's as demographics or data or dollar signs. It's just like the audience, and you don't really know much about them. They've been flattened to some sort of numbers or characteristics that aren't really holistic. And so the approach that we support with engagement journalism, no matter how you're doing it, is to start by listening. So again, you stop assuming that you know what people want to know, because no matter how representative or diverse your newsroom might be, you're never going to know the needs of everyone you serve. It's just a fundamental impossibility, and it's unfair to journalists and editors to be expected to have this magical thing called news judgment, where you can really understand what people who come from a very different background than you, different class, different political beliefs might need. That's why you need to listen to them so that you can do a better job meeting their information needs. And so the approach that we really encourage people to use is called the public powered approach, where you start by asking people, what do you not know that we can find out for you and with you? So this really flips the newsroom from being like a parent to like, I know what you need to know. I know what vegetables you need to have for dinner. To you saying, what is it that you are looking for, and how can I give you the dignity and respect that shows that I think you know what you need, and I'm going to be here to help you with it. So this is what the approach kind of looks like pictorially. But then how it can look in a story cycle is, again, I'm going to show some contrast here, where the traditional story cycle, the newsroom is highly involved, that's that green line, and all of the pre-publication, pre-broadcast decision-making. They're deciding what stories to even think about in pitching, which ones to assign, which ones to report. And then they publish or broadcast, and then that's the moment, the first time usually, where the public gets a chance to weigh in, or say you missed a spot, or ask questions, or in any way, shape what the newsroom has done. And if you are like me, I was a journalist who was working in a very deadline heavy newsroom, broadcast newsroom, where like every minute mattered. And after I published a story or broadcast it, I had to move on to my next assignment. I wasn't sitting there waiting to hear and to learn from and to change what I thought or did based on what how the story was being received. And so there's just a massive disconnect here, and a massive opportunity for actually learning and co-creation. And so the kind of engagement that we teach, and there's all sorts of different kinds of engagement that are amazing and fabulous and hewed to this kind of feedback loop model, so I'm just sharing one with you, is this public powered approach that we help a lot of newsrooms use, where the public is invited to ask questions about a topic that a newsroom feels like it might have the chops to cover, then curating the best questions to let the public vote on each other's ideas and ultimately decide where you put your resources. And then my favorite part as a reporter was actually having the people whose questions you're answering take part in the process in some way. And then after the story is published or broadcast, inviting people to say, what else do you want to know? What additional questions do you have, etc. So this is one way of allowing the public to be really democratically active in the decision-making structure of your newsroom, and to have a say and to have a voice about what information you're creating on their behalf. So I'll show you a couple examples of how this can look, and I'm just bringing in Hearken's technology here in so you can see when I use these other examples, if you're like, what are they using? What is this? These are some examples from some of our partners, but other people can use Google Forms, Typeform, Submittable, a pen and paper at a farmer's market. It really doesn't matter the tech, but it's about how do you create a space to listen to people, to get their information, respond back to them, and know what they need. And so we created our own tech a few years ago because the generic stuff just wasn't working for our needs. And I'll show you a brief example of what this can look like. So one of our partners, KQED in San Francisco, have a great series called Bay Curious, which is becoming a book that'll be out soon, which is really exciting. And they collect questions on the Bay Area, its culture, and its people. This guy, Eric, wanted to know why double parking wasn't enforced and cars weren't towed on Sundays, because in his neighborhood, everyone is double parking. And so Olivia, the reporter, got his question in, thought it was kind of interesting, was like, I never thought about that. Put it up for a vote. The public decided his question was the most interesting out of a couple others that she put up. And then Olivia ended up reporting the story and including Eric in the process. And the resulting story ended up performing way better than the typical report the newsroom does. Like, one of the things I love so much about this approach is that so often the stories that result from engagement would have never been assigned had it not been for this approach. Like, there wasn't a press conference that any city councilor was doing on parking problems where this story would have come out of. There wasn't a petition about stopping double parking. There wasn't anything like that. It was curiosity, just pure curiosity that led to a newsroom looking into something that ended up actually having a lot of importance and spurring discussions and even an event. The answer to this, in case you're curious, because questions also introduce mystery and we're mystery solving machines as human beings. The answer to it is that the neighborhood that Eric lived in had become really gentrified, and it had a ton of churches, and the people who used to live there got priced out, couldn't afford to live there, but still were part of their church community. And so the city allowed them to double park on Sundays to go to church. So that ended up being a really big story about gentrification. What are we doing? How are we making sure that people can still, visit their houses of worship, and lots of other discussions that relate. So
Hold on, Jennifer, one question came in. How was Eric involved in the report? Was he a source in the story? Did he connect the journalist to other sources who maybe used to live in the neighborhood as well? Kind of how was he as a listener involved further down the line?
Oh my gosh, great question. There's so many different ways that people who you get questions from can be involved. So I'll just give you a spectrum. They can be someone that you just credit at the top and say, hey, we got this question in from Eric. He wanted to know this. That could be the end of it. But I encourage and try and support a lot of newsrooms in having that person be involved. That could mean they come along to an interview with you. They get calls whenever the reporter has made kind of a big discovery, or they've kind of figured out what the angle is going to be, and they talk to the person whose question they're answering, explain it, get additional questions or quotes that could be used in the story. Oftentimes people are really surprised by what they learn in the reporting process, and also surprised at how rigorous it is. Like, they don't know how much it takes to report a story, and they become very appreciative and sometimes just shocked at how much work it is to report. We've had newsrooms where the question asker is the actual protagonist in the story and the main source, and you don't see a reporter at all. You see that person getting the answers, and the reporter is like a producer in the background. And so they are really the focus, and they get to go on an adventure and learn something. So it can be all sorts of different depths where the person is involved. Can't remember exactly how Eric was involved in this one. I know he's credited, but other times you might have that person's voice being on the radio, or photo or video being involved, but they are showing up in the story in some way. And also sometimes people can be anonymous too, if they want to whistle blow, but still have their question or their information need put to the front. Okay. Any other questions? I know I'm just like driving this like a freight train.
No, I think that's great. Thank you.
Okay, great question. Okay, speaking of questions, I love them. They are the best. Why curiosity? I am partial to engagement that deals in questions, in part because asking people for their opinions or their comments leads people who have already made up their mind about something to just kind of shout at each other of what they believe. But curiosity is actually this amazing vehicle for people who are humble enough to say they don't know something, to be able to get a platform. And I mean, journalism is based, like the atomic unit of all journalism is questions. Whether it's what's the weather going to be tomorrow, who won the game, what's at stake in the next city council meeting, etc. Everything is on questions. So it becomes really accessible for people of all ages, all backgrounds, to ask questions versus comment or give a tip or try and whistle blow. Like, you have or to pitch a story. In fact, it's very hard to pitch a story if you're not from a newsroom and don't know how they work. And it also just opens people up to new ideas. So the kind of reporting that results in it doesn't have to be based on a conflict either. It can be based on a quest to find information, and not just have it be, again, the kind of binary kind of reporting that results in people getting entrenched and all sorts of negative knock-on effects. So these are just a couple of examples of some folks who use this approach. At Flatland KC in Kansas City, they ask people to submit questions, vote on favorites, investigate, they share out what they find. Other folks use it for topics as well. So they have engagement and questions collected for every reporter that has a beat. So Manola here was a reporter on the Pacific Northwest Native communities, collecting questions on them. And then there's lots of different ways, even if it's on a topic. This is from, COVID-19 affecting women and family life, asking people how it's affected them, getting their questions, voting, letting people decide on each other ideas. And then also what I wanted to point out in terms of the business side of things, because at the end of the day, anything a newsroom does, especially in this moment of economic crunch for newsrooms, has to be justified in terms of whether or not it's driving something that matters, like engagement and revenue and email addresses and opt-ins and all those sorts of things. And what we find is that audience engagement is really good for business. So I won't read all of this out, but essentially, if you've heard of the funnel, it's a construct in which you kind of try and figure out who's slightly aware of you, who already knows you and is engaged, who's part of your posse and giving you money, and who's really, really a ride or die with your organization. And we find that engagement helps people at every stage of the funnel get closer to the newsroom and share what their needs are, and the newsroom to do better and more responsive reporting for them. It also, we found, builds trust in relationships. I'm really excited. A book is coming out soon from Dr. Sue Robinson about how journalists engage. And she did some studying of people applying this methodology to elections coverage, and really found that it built trust between newsrooms and their participants, helped them better listen, increase their audience size, etc. So the bottom line, talked about the top line before, but the more your audience feels included, engaged, and heard, the more likely that they see and hear proof that you're serving them directly, the more likely they are to trust you, consume your work, share your work, and pay you, whether that's becoming members, subscribing, going to a special event, etc. Okay, so now we're gonna, oh yeah, go ahead.
So this is all great, Jennifer. Thank you so much. What advice would you give to freelancers or independent contractors, people who don't necessarily have a website, an organization supporting them in some of these ways you've shown? How can they also apply this community engagement approach to their work?
Such a great question. Anywhere you're doing work, I do think it does help to have an audience to collect a bunch of information pre-reporting. But if you're a freelancer and you don't have that, or you don't have a relationship with an outlet that can put that query out there for you, you can always do it in different spaces where folks who have something at stake in what you're reporting hang out. So I would think about, if you're reporting on a topic and there's a bunch of Reddit communities who talk about that topic all the time, how could you jump in there and ask some questions? Or are there affinity groups? You might be able to get a question in their newsletter to get more input from the people who you're trying to serve, or who are centered in your story. So even if the newsroom doesn't have an audience, it's likely that whatever topic you're looking into, there are groups or places where people go who care about that thing, are hanging out, or who are affected by that thing are hanging out, that you could get some input from at some part of your process, whether it's what questions do they have about the topic, to having them weigh in on what you're learning and reporting and giving you more information about what's missing and what else you could report on, to also follow-up reporting. So one thing you could do is, once your story gets out there and is placed in some sort of publication, asking people at the end, what additional questions do you have about this topic that I could follow up with? Oftentimes, I think about journalism sometimes like the lumber industry, in which, the lumber industry will cut down a tree. And from that tree, they might make a big beam, let's say. But what they also have is a bunch of other stuff that isn't that beam, like sawdust and bark, and other wood chips, etc. So thinking about follow-up reporting, oftentimes that can be like the equivalent of wood chips, and using, the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, so to speak. You can revive that and actually make use of it, because always, for any story, you have to shave off all the stuff you learn into some angle, and people will have questions around the edges that you might be able to quick turn a follow-up story on. So you can also think about how can your outlet be useful in engagement after you post or publish or broadcast, if they're up for collecting follow-up questions. So those are a couple ideas.
Great, thanks.
I know. Okay, right on. There'll be more time at the end for questions. I'm a little more than halfway through, just to give folks a sense of where we are. Okay, so I wanted to share another set of principles about engagement. Again, no matter what kind of engagement you're doing, I'm trying to give you tools that are kind of universal so you can apply it to whatever sorts of engagement you're doing. Now, there are lots of different ways to engage. Some of them, I would say one category I would really encourage you to avoid, which is all the way on the left, extractive engagement. And the characteristics of extractive engagement, how you know you're being extractive, is essentially like the people who are participating are left no better off than they were before for participating. So, when you're designing engagement approaches, think about, are you giving context to people? Are you giving them an incentive to participate? Are you asking them to share a vulnerable moment in their life and like not following up with them or giving them any understanding of where that might be posted or published, etc.? Are you not following up? Are you taking advantage of the power differential? And are you like not actually like helping that person in some way based on how they're helping you? And that's essentially hoarding power instead of exchanging it or growing it. The center column is transactional, totally fine. It's a way of basically saying, hey, we'd like to hear this from you so that we may do X. People are given the rules of the game, how they can participate, what you're looking for. There's no necessarily like promise of a follow-up relationship. It's just saying like, here's the menu of options. Do you want to play this game? Do it. Okay, and here's what happens. Fine. This is a lot of engagement is transactional, and that's okay. Relational engagement is, I think, where like a lot of power, possibility growing, new futures can happen, like wild, funky, amazing stuff. And that's when you don't come in with a predetermined menu about how people can engage, and you are listening widely and expansively. You're giving people context for what you're looking for. You're looking to produce insights and build relationships, not just create content. The value of that participant is beyond just, playing by your rules. It might be they become a source or part of an advisory council or help you learn X thing. And the participant is left better off than they were before. They are cued in on what's happening. They feel bought in. They agree to the terms of your engagement, and they help you do things you never would have thought to do going into it. So I would just say, try it. If you're doing an engagement experiment or running them, just check off the design criteria when you've kind of created your strategy. Just make sure you're not being extractive. But if you have the bandwidth and the ability to be expansive and relational, like incredible things can happen. Okay, so I want to give you some cool stuff that can happen when you combine the wonderful opportunities that engagement journalism creates, plus the wonderful outcomes that solutions journalism makes possible. So these are the 6 steps of writing a solution story. Might be a little hard to see, but don't worry, the deck will be available to you after the fact here. But one thing, and I kind of mentioned this earlier about the freelancer idea, is that you could just create a solution story based on the principles of solutions journalism, and then at the end of it, ask people what additional questions they have to fuel more stories, or what additional solutions would they like to see you investigate, etc. So that's a way of just starting with solutions, ending with engagement that can then fuel more stories. This is an example of that from AZ Luminaria, who took part in the labor cohort. They're doing great work in Arizona. This is a story about their Southside Workers Center helping undocumented workers earn fair wages. And at the end of the story, they ask, what questions do you have about essential workers or labor that you'd like us to consider covering? So this is one way of just attaching engagement to a solution story to yield more information. Another thing you could do is start at the very top. Before you even do a solution story, you could start with a problem story, something that's going wrong, and then ask people for, do you know of anyone who's doing it better? do you have solutions to point us to? Maybe it's out of state, maybe it's out of country, maybe it's from a culture from, days gone by of how they did things differently, but asking people for their solutions to a problem story. So another example from AZ Luminaria here, they're reporting on Piedmont County jail deaths, really intense, terrible story about what's happening there, but they have a solutions tip box to engage people at the end of it, to get their questions or their ideas about what solutions that people might have or have seen around this topic. Because the people who are coming to these stories and reading them, they might be folks who have no stake at all or no relationship to the problem at hand, let's say the Pima County Jail. But they probably also are attracting people who do know a bit about it or who have a stake or who have some ideas. And those folks might be able to supply solutions that then AZ Luminaria can look into to empower people with not just shedding light on what's going wrong where they live, but also what could be going differently and right. Another example.
Just to interrupt real quick, Arizona Luminaria, they did do a follow-up story based on that tip box on bail reform. So they actually continued the cycle, and they have more solution stories coming out.
Fabulous. Okay, I need to update the slide. I want to add the next step there. That's terrific. Thank you so much, Angela. And one other example here is from partners WHYY in Philadelphia. They sent a reporter out to do really expansive listening and engagement. So already trying to engage the community in the way that Sammy Kiola was reporting the story. And then at the end of that big piece, asking people what solutions to gun violence they have. So again, starting with something that might be a problem or even might be an engagement story and asking people for solutions about the problem that the story is overall about. On that note, another thing that actually Sammy Kiola, that reporter, worked on when she was at CAP Radio prior to being at WHYY was really around engaging people in the reporting process in a pretty radical and I think phenomenal way. This woman, Jessica Maria Ross, who was at CAP Radio for a long time and did a lot of work on engaging communities and listening to people differently and co-creating stories with communities, just did incredible work with her team on repositioning sources as being co-creators, especially around traumatic topics for which they are usually just portrayed as victims. They don't have a say. It can be re-triggering, all of these sorts of things. So I linked to in the deck, you can go and learn more about what they've done here, but I see this almost as a meta approach to solutions journalism, and that it's helping to create a solution to a problem in terms of how sources are sometimes treated, as well as what the products end up becoming out of reporting. So what they did with this guide to sexual assault and this trauma work is they created a guide for reporting sexual assault in Sacramento County from the reporting, which is a solution that needed to be had in the community because people didn't know. There wasn't a one-stop shop for victims or people who know victims to go to get their needs met. So the newsroom ended up creating a solution themselves for a problem in their community. I'm gonna pause real quick and take a sip of water, Angela, if there's any questions.
Sure. One came in just about kind of the first steps to community engagement if it's not culturally practiced normally. So how can you kind of start to show the readers that this can be a mutually beneficial relationship?
That is such a great question. And I could talk for like 6 hours on where to get started, but what I will do is say at the end, we're going to share with you and follow up for everyone who RSVP'd. You'll get I think it's like a 14-page guide that we created for how to introduce engagement reporting to your newsroom. That includes like meeting template agenda ideas, how to get people bought in. But at the end of the day, I just want to say it usually starts with one person saying, hey, I have a hunch or an idea or an experiment I want to run, and getting people who are open to that to buy in and to do a cycle or a couple cycles of it, see what works. And when they have success, start to share it out and grow on that momentum. So I haven't seen many people successfully lobby an entire newsroom to start doing engagement work just writ large, even if it comes from the boss to say, we're all doing engagement now. until you have that experience and you're transformed by it, it's really hard to get people to buy in. So I think it's really about how do you have as many cycles as quickly as possible for people to have a taste of doing reporting differently. And then they'll start to like really get attracted to it and maybe even say, I'm not going back to the old way. But it does tend to happen one heart and mind at a time, which is not satisfying if you want to make change quickly, but I think is the only way it really happens. I'm going to cough again if there's another question.
Sure. This is a question I think we get a lot, both Hearken and Solutions Journalism, the Solutions Journalism Network. And it kind of has to go back to that traditional way of reporting and the emergent strategies. But when you're involving sources in this co-creation model, how do you ensure journalistic impartiality and kind of keep those boundaries of source and reporter and the appearance of conflict of interest?
It's a great question. Actually, the one of the pieces that's linked in here talks a little bit more about that, but it's also, I think, a lot of people. One other thing on like a from to chart that I see as the emergent model is going from a theory that journalists can ever truly be objective to a theory that journalists are transparent in what their experience with it is, or if they have an opinion or how they went about doing something. Because at the end of the day, like none of us are blank slates. We don't come into any story just as an automaton able to be fully objective about things. So I think the more that journalists say what role they had, why they're doing something, the reason behind it. Trusting News, which is run by Joy Mayer and Lynn Walsh, does phenomenal work helping newsrooms really become more transparent with their mission statements, why they do what they do. And people will trust what you're doing, even if you're saying we're doing this for X reason, as long as you're transparent about doing it. In terms of interrupting or not getting too close to sources, that's something I don't know that we have the time to tackle in here. But I think part of it is about creating explicit norms and expectations for everyone who's participating in reporting, about why you're doing it, what the goals are, what your roles are, and to create some rules of engagement yourselves about how to engage with one another. And Jessica Maria Ross, I feel like, has probably written about this as well, of creating community agreements or just being really transparent with like what the goals are and what the tensions might be with those goals. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, sorry, Angela. I think I sucked down a piece of quinoa from my salad and it's like in my throat. Anyway, we will go on. I wanted to kind of close out here with a few just additional lessons on engagement, and then we can open it up for questions at the end. So these are just some things to keep in mind, things that I have so much debt to other people in this field who are doing great work on this topic, and we'll share out a couple of things that really impacted me in this engagement community. Ariel Zarolnik, who's an incredible engagement thinker and maker at LAist in Los Angeles, wrote a Neiman Lab prediction a couple years ago that articulated the difference between audience engagement and community engagement, because oftentimes we hear them interchangeably and they are different. And I just want to encourage more people to use this language because I think it's really useful for people being specific and then being able to achieve their goals by that specificity. So she defines audience engagement as being focused on the people who are already coming to you. So trying to build habit, loyalty, revenue, alongside the people who already know your news outlet, who are consuming your stuff. So you might be analyzing data, performance, shares, consumptions. Maybe you're creating advisory councils or listening to the people who already come to you to better know their needs. Super important. All newsrooms should be doing this. Community engagement is a slightly different animal, and it's also very important. It's focusing on understanding the newsroom's role in the broader community and positioning the newsroom as a player, but not the only player, to help fill those roles. And so this isn't about the people who are coming to you. It's about how can you go to where other people are that you are trying to better understand and serve, listening to what they think, centering them in the stories, making sure you're creating stories that are useful for them, not about them. and generating, oftentimes community partnerships with folks who already have relationships with the communities you don't yet, to help establish trust and build on that and not parachute in, essentially. And so when some folks come to Hearken and they're like, we want to do community engagement, and they haven't done audience engagement first, I get a little nervous, because the way I think about it is essentially like, okay, I'll explain this image. My daughter's really into Elmo, so I had to use Elmo here. If you haven't gotten good at hosting a party yet, and let's say you want to make a really big like cake and you've never made a cake before, are you going to be better off inviting people who are high stakes, who you don't have a relationship with, to come and try your cake for the first time? Or are you better off inviting people who know you, who you have some relationship with? You can maybe make a cake that looks more like the one on the left a few times before you get good and make the one that looks like the one on the right. I would say you want to start with the people who you already know, get good at serving them, so that you are less likely to screw up, do harm, and not follow through on promises with people who your newsroom may have harmed before, maybe haven't listened to, maybe have misrepresented. You want to get good at this before you start trying to listen to others, because harm can be done and trust can be broken if you promise them you're going to listen and follow through and you don't, because you're not good at it yet. So that's one lesson. Another one thing I just wanted to share is there's so many different ways to invite participation. There's, on digital, you can use social media, your website, ads, newsletters. If you have a broadcast medium, you can use promos, tops or kickers of stories, or PSAs in between. And in real life is amazing if you are able to, and your organization or newsroom works in a geographic space, going to events, tabling at festivals, billboards, QR codes, flyers, bookmarks at libraries, skywriting, like literally being in person. You can do lots of interesting calls to action, and then partnering with community groups as well. The image on the right here are bookmarks that we made back in the day when I was at WBEZ in Chicago, the series Curious City. We distributed them to all the libraries across Chicago because they are geographically distributed in ways that other resources in town are not. So we wanted to give these away at libraries so folks could have an opportunity to participate in the journalism who might not have heard of us before. The other thing I wanted to just share is that the depth of participation of the people you're trying to serve and the amount of representation you give them in a story equals their likelihood to share the content. So if you just invite people's input and you don't credit them in the story, they're not as likely to share. If you include them and you acknowledge them by name, if you include their photo and a bit more about them, if you feature them in the story, if you allow some ride along, the deeper their participation and their shaping of the story and their credit that you give them, the more likely they are to be super pumped and share it with their networks, and invite other people then to say, oh, I want to participate too. Because if you think about it, the way to get in the news for most people, if they ever get in the news, is because they did something terrible, or they did something wonderful, like won the spelling bee in 4th grade, or they were a witness to something terrible, or a witness to something wonderful. But everyday people don't typically show up in the news, people who don't have extreme amounts of power or, extreme lack of power. So this is a way of starting to bring people in and represent them in your coverage who are more like kind of the general population, and to stop having journalism be as much of a funhouse mirror of the people who are like radically powerful and people who are radically not powerful. And so some examples here, if you're doing a print story or digital, like just share a little bit about the question asker, a little bio about them, why they were curious, who they are, etc. And so these sorts of things, which really can be so easy and so quick, can be really powerful in helping people know that the story came from someone like them and how they can participate. So in closing, the more you invite, engage, and represent the people you're trying to serve, the more likely they are to pay attention to you, and for you to get more solutions to your journalism, to offer solution ideas to people, to help them be more civically engaged, and then contribute to more solutions in the world. So depending on your theory of journalism and what you think it's for, I think it's to help people distribute responsibility for care and to make, as Eric Gordon, the professor, has written so beautifully, and to help people understand how to make decisions in their lives and what things can lead to better outcomes. That's solutions and engagement right there. And so we will follow up and share this deck, the recording, as well as this guide for how to introduce engagement efforts, and another guide that we're almost finished with that will share how to combine solutions journalism and engagement journalism as well. So we're here to support you at Hearken and at Solutions Journalism in all of these approaches. So I'll stop sharing screen here, and we have some more time for questions, I believe.
Great, thanks. We have one in the chat, and then I know some people are going to be raising their hands to participate in the chat. Can you speak, Jennifer, a little bit to how to apply these concepts to more visually driven stories? People who are working with photo editors or photographers to bring in more of these practices into like the visual side of reporting.
Yeah, I mean, there is the having the visual of the people who are participating in the stories take precedence, or whether or not it's in a sidebar at the bottom of a story, or if you're doing broadcast, news, something visual, of having that person participate in some way. Even if you're doing news where you're not physically in the same location as someone, if you're working for a topic-based news outlet or a national-based news outlet, you can always ask people, given the technology that's afoot right now, to shoot a quick video of themselves, asking a question or sharing their feedback about why they care about it. So thinking about how can you help people, even with their own tools that they have, be included visually in the stories that you're doing. Also, if you do some sort of polls or generating questions or comments from folks, and you're able to publish a little bit more data about what you found, those are also opportunities for infographics or other visuals that can help people see that this story was shaped by many hands and minds, and not just your newsroom's decision making. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. Nellie, you have your hand raised.
I do, thank you. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Yes, second time we're meeting. I was part of the ICFJ LEAP program. You were a mentor for a day.
Oh, fabulous. Yes. Hello, Nellie.
Yeah, the listening and engagement group. So we're still working on our prototype. We were lucky to get funding, and I'm so glad that I caught this session, and I was able to get a refresher from you, because we're still dealing with that explaining, we're still dealing with explaining to people who are not part of the group, our developers as well, how to break down the process of engagement between the journalist or the newsroom and the audience. Like the step-by-step question you were asked, how does the engagement look like in detail? So if you have finally gotten this tip from an audience or a listener, whoever it is, and then you're working with them, how can they see that in some sort of a documented process? So I guess my question is, just to help me have clarity, is does it need to be clear cut how the engagement process works, especially with solutions, right? I'm so interested in engagement and solutions. I never thought about them blending together. So I'm really geeking out here in my living room. So in Lagos, it's about almost 9 p.m. So I'm geeking out where I am. Yeah. So I guess that's my question. Like, does it need to be clear cut, or to each his own, so long as they know they get the end result, where the end will probably justify the means, sort of?
And let me ask you, Nellie, do you mean, does it need to be clear cut for the participant in the audience? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. In my case, being a journalist, for the journalist and the audience, and the listener they're trying to engage at that exact time. And I'm not talking community now, I'm talking one-on-one audience while you're trying to build them. And in a case where there's a tip, for instance, and you want to take them along the journey of reporting and being in the news gathering process, does it need to be clear cut, or do you work as, do you make it quite free flowing, just so long as you get that outcome in the end?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a both and. So what we have found success in is creating a kind of FAQ document that when someone is involved, you can share out what they can expect. And with that, you can say, depending on your availability and your interest in participating, here's the menu of options that we might ask you to participate in. And here's what to expect if that happens. And then also saying, if you don't want to participate beyond, you giving us the idea, that's fine as well. So what I'd like to do as a reporter was, anytime we did take someone's question or idea that we wanted to report on, I set up a time to do a quick call with them, an interview with them, to learn more about who they are, why they care, what's at stake, what a satisfactory answer would look like to them. Because sometimes in that process, you would learn that what they expected you to do was like a college thesis. And you're like, need to set expectations that you don't have that reporting power and time at your hand, but here's the types of things that you could make with the time you might have, and asking them what aspect of that is most interesting to you. So I think as soon as possible, you can have a one-on-one conversation with someone, whether it's over the phone or video or email, the higher fidelity, the better, to set expectations and to learn to what extent they want to be along, and then provide them some documentation about here are the options here, so that they feel like they can trust and understand what's at play. Because most people have not talked to a journalist before, don't know how journalism works. And it can be really scary to open yourself up to a journalist and say, they start asking you questions. You don't know what off the record means. You don't know how to say, can I just think about this and get back to you? Like, it's a whole dynamic that I think the more explicit you can be and the more you can teach people about how it works and what you're looking for, the better the outcomes are going to be all around. So in short, I guess I would say, Kelly, and long, but in short, if you can create something to share with them to say, here are the options to choose from and how you engage. Can we find a time to chat? And I want to learn more about what you're interested in, what you might be available for. We can't promise, that we can take you to an interview. It might depend on timing, but here's what we endeavor to do to include you and to make sure what we produce is ultimately of value to what your needs are. Because at the end of the day, that's the goal. So is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking right now that when we do finalize the prototype, it will take sessions like this, working with newsrooms to understand the dialogue that happens post, the invite. So it's not just saying, hey, come in and we can do this together with you, but you also need to break down some of the steps and explain some of the processes to the audience member until, of course, people get familiar with what it means, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And we often find that the audience members are really geeked out and fascinated by how the process works, and it increases trust in their news outlet, in your news outlet, when they know that there are checks and balances, and hey, now we have to go to fact checking, or now it's in this phase of editing, this is what's going to happen next. You're really, I know it's like a media literacy campaign, one person at a time, which might feel overwhelmingly limited.
Yeah.
Does add up, and it does help you get better at explaining what you do to others and gaining their trust.
Thank you. It's good to meet you again.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much, Nellie. And I hope you get to sleep soon.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other burning questions? I haven't seen any come in. Oh, I see one. Yes, go ahead and come off chat. I mean, off mute.
Chinoso, can you hear us? If you want to come off mute here, I'll ask to unmute you.
Hello, I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for this wonderful class. So I'm Chinoso Kenneth. I'm the publisher of the Solutions Paper. The Solutions Paper is a startup multimedia news organization that focuses on using solutions journalism to spur civic engagement and participation in development issues in the community and in the nation of Nigeria generally. We basically focus on using solution journalism and publishing solution journalism stories. And clearly, this engagement technique is something that will really play well in order to help us get more citizen engagement in solving development problems across the community. So my question is, how exactly do we apply this, say, with government officials and those in authority in order to also get their full participation, transparency, and basically get them more involved in solving these societal problems in the society, as well as increase government public engagement?
Such a great question. And I'll give you a quick example. I can't name the newsrooms because we're working together on this now, but what I'm working with a couple newsrooms to do is to actually model to the local government how they should be better listening to their stakeholders and reporting stories that give the stakeholders input that can be useful to the government, to encourage them to start adopting processes like this of their own. So the example here is in the US, and I know many other places, there's an epidemic of opioid use. So these really high potency painkillers that people get addicted to and overdose and die. And there's settlement money coming into different states, and the settlement money is going to local states and mayors and towns and whatnot to be dispersed for abating these programs, but they haven't talked to the people who are most affected by opioid use. So victims, survivors, first line responders. They haven't talked to them. They've just said, we're going to give this out X% here and Y% there, but it's going just on people who are lobbying them and not on the people whose lives have been most affected. And so this newsroom is going to be engaging and listening to different stakeholder groups that are affected by the opioid crisis to get their ideas and their desires for what they would do with that money if they actually had participatory budgeting power to then feed back to the people at city council to think about. So to me, it's a little bit of like, how can you model for the government how to do this kind of solutions and engagement work in your own journalism, and hopefully start inspiring them to do it themselves. But I don't know that you can force it, other than maybe pointing out when they are making decisions without stakeholder input, and that is being very harmful, and trying to create dissatisfaction within their ranks so that they do think that they should be having some sort of listening process in the work that they do. So I hope that's helpful. I wish there was, I don't know, a better way, but that's what we're trying.
That is great. That is great. Thank you once again. This has been a very enlightening class.
Oh, great. Excellent.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be sending out, as Jennifer mentioned, some resources for you to use. And I will get you some handouts, some worksheets that you can start creating some strategies in your newsroom or for your own work, as well as this slide deck. The recording will be posted on our website at a later date. And so along with the handouts, but I want to make sure you all who attended get the handouts first. So that will be following up in the next couple of days, along with Jennifer and my email, so that you can follow up with any other additional questions. Again, thanks so much, Jennifer, and everyone else who joined us today. Please be in touch.
Right on. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.